Hello, everyone, and welcome back to MF Uncensored. Don't forget, if you guys are listening to us on the go, you can find us on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, basically anywhere you get your podcast. You can also find more of our content on our website, themisfitfaction.com. There you find links to not only this show, but some of our other shows like Multiverse Fancast and Cinematic Adventures. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Paul, and with me is a guy who I just read off his own resume to him. And as I was reading it, I was more and more impressed and just more and more in awe of the guy that I'm actually about to talk to. And one of the best things about our show is we talk to people of all different walks of life and backgrounds and stories. And this one, I can tell just from the pre-show, is going to be a lot of fun to discuss. And I'm sitting with Mr. Gary Fay. Gary, how are you today?
I'm well, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on, and I'll do my best to live up to that intro, mate. Thank you.
I always do my intros as honest as I possibly can, because in all honesty, I one thing that I'm good at, and it translates well for podcasting, is I'm always a really good judge of when I know a conversation is going to go a certain way. I knock on wood, I've only had one poor interview on the show, like at least for
Well, let's
me.
keep the streak going.
So, Gary, before we get started, I want to point out also that you're calling in all the way from Australia, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's actually late in the morning for me. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm a 4 a.m. starter, so the sun's up. It's a nice day. So yes, Australia, and we're tomorrow morning here. And a little tip for everybody: tomorrow's a great day.
See, I like that. Also, you and I have something in common. We are both 4 a.m. risers.
There you go. Yeah, I wasn't. I was always an early riser, but as time got on, I just found more and more productive in the morning, and I realized that sleep was within my control, and you don't just have to sleep in to get more sleep. You can get to bed a little earlier, and I just get more done between 4 and 8 in the morning than I get between 8 and 12. So it made sense.
Yeah. So my work schedule is predominantly from 7 a.m. to about 3 p.m. So for me, I like starting off the day the right way, and I like starting it on my own terms. Like
Yeah.
when I come home, the last thing I want to do is hit the gym or, go for a walk. Like, I want that time in the morning is like my time. I work out, I meditate, I do all whatever I can to just kind of set the tone for my own day.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into some of the work I do, but bookending your day with a routine of some sort, once you have control of your morning, your day just tends to go better. If your morning is in chaos, chances are the rest of your day ends up in chaos also. So, yeah, to me, it's just about taking a little bit of that control and using the time that works well for me to its maximum benefit.
Yeah, I agree. Like for me, if I start off my morning the right way, the day will follow. And I also found that if the day sucks, if I have a terrible day, whether it's at work or whatever, then the rest of my night is shot. I'm either pouring myself a drink when I really don't need one or eating something that I shouldn't. So I'm with you on that. So before we get into what you do now, because that's also super interesting for me, I want to talk a little bit about your background. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself from back in the day?
Yeah, sure. But I mean, I grew up like a relatively normal person in what is Western Sydney in Australia. It's working class, middle class, humble beginnings. But probably the most notable part of my history is the 18 years I spent with the Australian Federal Police. From a young fella, I was 22 when I joined. Excuse me, and I had a fantastic career. A kid from where I grew up didn't typically end up on that side of policing. And, I got to travel the world. I spent a little bit of time in surveillance, which is, a covert type of role. September 11 happened, and I joined what was our close protection unit. So most people would align that to what the Secret Service do, I suppose, the protection of high office holders. And a few years later, I got the privilege of running our Australian Prime Minister's protection team. So again, the equivalent of the US President's protection detail. I will stress that the two details are very different in the way that we operate in our side of the world and what we do, a lot smaller. But yeah, I got the privilege of running the Australian Prime Minister's protection team for a number of years. And as my career developed, I moved a lot more into strategy, and I ended up running our commissioner's office. So similar to the director, potentially the director of the FBI's office. I used to run their office over that 18-year career. So I was very fortunate to see all parts of the world, sit at all different types of tables, and have conversations and discussions with, at times the lowest of criminals and at other times the highest of politicians. And some people may label them exactly the same. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
you beat me to it. I was going to say it. Oh, you got me.
But yeah, it was a fantastic time. And that's a great story in and of itself. But I was also, strangely enough, the most successful part of my career battling a major depressive disorder and also a gambling addiction. And that was my means of escaping some noise in my head that I couldn't turn off. And in the end, that cost me $2 million. It cost me my career from some bad choices I was making. It cost me my reputation, that 18 years of great service. And it had me on the, really considering the value of my own life at a particular point. And, that was a very scary realization for me, that the way that I had been living had predominantly been on autopilot. And I'd love what I did, but it didn't feel like it didn't have any purpose or meaning to me at that time. And I just kept following the corporate ladder. What's the next thing I need to do? How can I get more? Where can I get the next promotion? Where's the next money coming from? What about the next trip? And eventually I broke. And I've spent the best part of the last 7 or 8 years rebuilding, first of all, myself. And then I've been fortunate enough to also assist a lot of others, especially in the high performance, high pressure, and high profile field, deal with their own levels of obstacles that pop up, usually in the mental strength area, sometimes in the performance area, but usually it starts when we notice we've got a bit of a problem. And that's the Cook's tour of the last the last 30 years of my life.
Wow. So I'm going to circle back to something that you were talking about. Do you feel that it was your career in law enforcement? Because we are a very pro law enforcement show here. I have family that's law enforcement. I have very close friends that are law enforcement. And I know that law enforcement in itself often brings an element of mental stress, whether it's what you see, what you interact with, what you deal with. I'm not sure how the police are viewed in Australia, but in America, it's not always the most positive view. And 99% of the cops that I know are great people. They just want to come home to their loved ones at the end of the day. So do you think that it was a correlation from the stress of your job that led you to find satisfaction elsewhere, or was it something completely unrelated?
Yeah, I think there are some similarities in the policing Australia and US. There's certainly a lot of differences, and I would say that it is a lot more extreme in the US. From the time that I've spent there, and the people in law enforcement that I know, it's probably fair to say that there is a level of stress that is associated with being in that field. I would tend to think, though, the bigger contributor to where I ended up was the culture of policing, and to be fair, the culture of many closed in business models. So whether it's police or the military, athletes, even business people, the culture tends to be, it's very difficult to speak up if you've got an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the follow on from that is it's even very difficult to recognize yourself that you have an issue, because you've grown up in this organization, in this brotherhood, in this alpha dominated environment. I identified as a problem solver. And if I'm a problem solver, and if I'm someone who keeps pushing forward no matter what, and I'm always there for my teammates, then it makes it very difficult to even acknowledge to yourself that, hey, I've got a bit of an issue. Then you've got to also speak up about it. And that's difficult because you don't see anybody speaking up about it, or not necessarily speaking up, but even saying to someone, hey, have you ever had this drama? Or here's a problem I've got that I can't solve. And then I think it actually snowballs. So, I've made some outlandish statements in the past that your mental health is self-made, right? Like my depression was self-made. And it's not to say that something didn't exist that created it, but I battled it for 10 years. If I had have done something different 10 years earlier, it would have gone in a completely different direction. And I wasn't capable at the time, nor did I have the awareness or the knowledge or the comfort level to recognize it myself and then talk to somebody about it. And so, yes, I think there is stress in the job that exists, but I think it is compounded by the fact that it's not a natural environment to have a problem.
Mm-hmm. So you found yourself at almost like a crossroads where you've lost all this money, your career is shot, and unfortunately, any career, your reputation for the most part is what makes you. Like if you're any job you're working in, everybody has a reputation in some regards. It's whether like that's the lazy one, or that's the one that works really hard, or that's this one. So you found yourself at this like really bad spot. How did you navigate through getting from this terrible position you were in to where you ended up now?
Out of necessity was really the driver. I remember vividly researching some not very nice things about ending my life and realizing that this is starting to get very scary. And so I went and spoke to a few people about it and realized that I have to do something regardless of whether I was working long hours and that was contributing to stress and I wasn't seeing family and all these other factors that actually existed. I started to realize that I was the one that was bearing the cost. And it wasn't for the police to fix it for me. It wasn't for my boss to fix it. It wasn't for my partner to fix it. It wasn't for my family to fix it. I was the one that was bearing the cost. So I bore the responsibility of doing something about it. And I was fortunate enough to be able to draw on my problem solving ability. Once I got out of my own head, I really believed that if I understood it, I could fix it. And so I just started trying to learn all I could about neuroscience, about psychology, about peak performance, about addiction, about routines, habit building. And I started to piece together bits and pieces of it from experts around the world that I worked with. And I found a system that, I could reverse engineer that ended up working for me over a period of time. A lot of trial and error. Still some pain went on through that period, but basically learned to synthesize it down so that at any time, for any reason, I can go back to it to improve wherever I'm at.
So right now you define yourself as an executive life strategist and a performance coach. Can you kind of elaborate on what that is? Like if somebody had no clue what you're talking about, how would you explain that to them?
Yeah, I work with high performers, helping them overcome obstacles to achieve their optimal outcomes in personal and professional life. So typically, I will work with somebody that recognizes an obstacle or a problem. They might not know what it is. That's another big problem with high performers. They can typically feel that something's wrong, but being unable to identify it, how on earth am I going to ask somebody for help if I don't know what I'm asking for help for? So yeah, I work with high achievers to basically organize their thoughts, recreate an identity if that's an issue, and help them find tactics to overcome those obstacles. First of all, to identify them, and then to work through them so that they can perform better. And I work with high performers in all fields. I do work with athletes and executives. I work with people from the military and from the police, and also work with high performing dads and mums that are just struggling with life at home. So, you know, most people where they're struggling isn't the fact that they aren't able to do the thing they want to do. It's that there is a lot of chaos going on in their mind, a lot of emotions overflowing into their logical thought processes. And the strategist part really is that pulling apart the life or pulling apart the performance or pulling apart the career and putting a strategy together that actually puts everything in its place and allows everybody to work to their best potential.
I like that. I really do. High performers are the people that do so much and then they get to a point where they don't understand why something isn't working or something's wrong. And it sounds like you really have it down to how to help them with that program. And it sounds like that's what you, at the end of the day, you're doing. You're trying to help people overcome what's keeping them back. Now, for you, what are the most common kind of challenges you get? I'm sure finances is probably one of the biggest ones, but like if somebody were to come to you and be like, hey, this is what's going on, what's the most common one that you tend to deal with?
Uh, Funnily enough, I've never tried to be a relationships coach, but most people I see, they come to me when their relationships are breaking down.
Mhm.
And it's interesting that you asked the question that way and also mentioned things like finances. I talk a lot about people try to solve the problem they see in the mirror. And so they will come to me because the relationship's breaking down. They don't know why, but they know they've got some part to play in it. They come and see me when they've lost all their money or they've they're drinking too much, or they're eating too much, or they can't achieve the thing that they want to achieve. And they always will come for the problem they see in the mirror. And primarily the issues are deeper. This is my own experience as well. And we rarely, not I won't say we never, but we rarely focus on the problem that they come to see me for. We focus on rebuilding identity, rebuilding purpose. Most people, there's a great quote from Thomas Merton, who was an American monk, and he said people will spend their whole lives climbing a ladder only to realize once they reach the top, it was against the wrong wall. And people do that in their lives. They chase things and they feel like certain things will bring them happiness. And then they get those things, or they miss out on those things, and they realize this just what doesn't feel right. And that ends up manifesting itself in risky investments, again, drinking, gambling, drugs, infidelity, buying flashy cars, laziness, scrolling on Netflix, all of those sorts of things. That's how it comes out. But predominantly the question is, I don't know who I am, and I don't know how to figure it out.
It's wild to think, like, sometimes you'll see the most successful people, like, especially most people equate success to some sort of financial thing, like, oh, he's, got
Yep.
the best suits, or he's got a beautiful house. Like, it's funny, after I turned 30, I noticed people's houses more. Like, it's like a weird thing that happens. And then I got married and got our own house, and now we notice everybody's houses. And it's one of those things where you're like, man, I wish I could afford that house. It would make me happy. It would make me successful. It would fill whatever's missing. I find that the quietest times with my wife, like the times where we're sitting, we don't even have to be talking. Like, if we're each, like, if she's reading a book, and I'm on the PlayStation, or I'm doing podcast work and she's doing schoolwork, those tiny moments are the most fulfilling moments for me, where there's no need to be successful in it. Like, for me, it's just being present and being with my wife, who loves me unconditionally most of the time. But I like that. It's crazy to think sometimes, to look at these people that outwardly they're the most successful people in the world, private jets and all these things, and then there's just something that's not right inside them, and they have no idea what it is, and they think that just getting more and more and more is the solution, when in all honesty there's something else that's going on that they don't even know.
Yeah, and for most people, it's that they don't articulate it to themselves, and that they often try to fill a hole with something they see the rest of the world achieving. If
Mhm.
if person X has more money and they look happy, then I must need more money. If that person's got the great wife and they look happy, then that's what I need to have. And the way that I put it is, in the absence of a conscious identity about who we are ourselves, in the
Mhm.
absence of a conscious identity, we all become a victim of circumstance, a victim of conditioning, and a victim of comfort, which means we look externally for our validation. And in the absence of doing the work on ourselves and creating that conscious identity, which exists inside everybody, it's just that we don't really want to do the work on it because we have to then admit that we haven't been living the way we should have.
Right.
If we don't have that conscious identity, if we don't have that conscious purpose, we are almost compelled to look everywhere else to try and figure out what will make me happy. And the kicker is, it never does. It never. It's very rare that you're going to just luck out and find the one thing that makes you happy, because there's billions of things that it could be.
Yeah, I like to think, like, right now in America, the American lottery is like $1 billion plus dollars. And I like to think at this point in my life that $1 billion, if I were to win it right now, I would still be doing a lot of the same stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I would just have a nicer podcast studio, in all honesty. And that's because, I have a level of fulfillment that I really feel comfortable with. And will I enjoy some of the amenities that come with $1 billion? Sure.
Sure.
But in all honesty, like, I would still live a very similar life to what I have now. And, you brought up something about how people kind of look for external validation. Do you think social media and things like Instagram, where it's almost applauded to be like either an influencer or likes or this, do you think that has affected the way that people view themselves in the world?
It's definitely affected the way that people view themselves, but I also think it can be a good tool. I mean, I don't on my social media platforms, I don't see a lot of people standing beside Lamborghinis promoting a fantastic world, because that's not who I am or what I search for.
Right.
Well, I don't feed into that algorithm. We've recently had a baby. I see a lot of baby stuff now,
Congratulations.
right? On thank you, on Instagram and Facebook, because that's what I look up, or maybe that's what I'm a little bit more interested in. But yeah, I think it definitely has fed into people's, it's feeding that belief, or at least provide you something to look at if you are searching externally for that validation. It's right in your hands now. In the past, even 30 years ago, it was really maybe on TV, but that was a bit outlandish, trying to be like the rich people on TV. And so it was really just your own community that you could see. So you had to go out to actually look at people in order to figure out if that's what you wanted. You had to try things, you had to do things. Whereas now all you have to do is flick your finger and say, well, that's what I want to be. If I could be that, I would be happy. And good luck going down that path. It's nice to have nice stuff, but if you have nice stuff and you still don't know who you are, I've been there. It's really not the best place to be.
Yeah. So for you though, something that we talked about a little bit off air and you brought up, you seem to be a big advocate for continuing education. Obviously, you mentioned that after when you had to reevaluate where you were, you looked at neuroscience and psychology and therapy. What kind of continuing education did you do to get to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a lot of it was informal at the start, and that's because I didn't have the resources or even the knowledge of where to look. So, I started in places like YouTube and just watched interviews of people that I admired or I would like to be like. And I think it's important, before you start doing that, to have a little bit of a conversation with yourself about where you want to get to, and people and personality types and values that you do admire, so that you start to watch and reflect the right things, or the right things for you. And so I started watching podcasts and watching interviews of people that had been through things like I'd been through. Then I moved into neuroscience, and one of the early things I got to watch was Dr. Joe Dispenza doing a talk, and that interested me on the neuroscience front. And other life coaches, I suppose, and success coaches and psychologists and popular psychology. And that really fueled my understanding on a basic level of what is going on inside my mind. And then as I got more resources and as I started to rebuild my life, I wanted to formalize it as well. So I've been back to university to do a master's in brain and mind sciences, so that's a little bit more formal about neuroscience and psychology, because again, I always come from that premise that if I can understand it, then I can fix it. And that has helped me a lot over the last 7 or 8 years personally, but it's also helped me, the informal training has helped me put the formal training into a common language that helps. Not everybody wants to know about specific cells in the brain, right? But they do understand how they try and talk themselves out of going to the gym, right? It's exactly the same. It's the same answer. It's just that, one is easy to understand, and the other one, you'd need 4 years at uni to try and figure it out.
So full disclosure, I'm actually taking a medical course right now. It's a 4-month medical
Okay.
course. And as you said, first of all, I had post-traumatic stress, as you said it, because it is a tough course. I'm losing my mind slowly. At time of recording, I'm on like 4 hours of sleep just because of all the training. But like they said the exact same thing in the textbook. It's like when dealing with patients, you don't use fancy medical terms. You don't try and like oversell what you're saying. You literally use the most common, simple things. And I find that like that's the most effective. When people ask like, why do you work? Like I work out every day. I love to work out. It's something that I do. It's something that I enjoy, and it's something that just sets my brain in the right state. People ask, like, why do you wake up so early to work out? I go, because I like it. It doesn't have to have necessarily a reason. And I'm sure there are reasons in my brain that it's like dopamine and all these things and stress relievers. But I like at the end of the day, you found a way to take the science and also the layman terms and make it palatable for people to understand, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part because, I mean, there's plenty of professions in the world that like to keep their own language so nobody else understands them, right? That's how professionals, that's how lawyers get paid big money. That's how doctors get paid big money. And, but actually, I was having a conversation with a doctor the other day about some bilateral knee replacements. And I said, why is it a bilateral knee replacement? Do we have more than two? So would we have a trilateral knee replacement? No, you're either replacing both knees or one knee. But they create language, or they have language that makes it sound more professional. It's fine. I mean, we do want to go to professional doctors, and this was just a joke we were having. But, if I want to move people, people have to understand it, right? People have to have a reason to move. And if you don't understand what's going on, and it makes it very difficult to build trust and rapport. And in the work that I do, not everybody has to believe it, but they do have to believe that I believe it. And part of that is me transferring that belief. So if I start talking in terms of axons and neural pathways and all of these sorts of things that people might not understand, they switch off. We don't build the rapport. They don't trust me, and we don't get anywhere. So it's vitally important that when I work with somebody, they understand what I'm saying, they understand what's happening inside them, and they understand what is required for them to move from where they are now to where they want to be. And I've just been fortunate enough that, I spend a lot of time perhaps in, middle class Australia, which means I have a very common language, very common vernacular. And I'm also blessed that I've been able to do some of the studies I have, which means I get the best of both worlds and hopefully explain it the best way possible for whoever I'm talking to.
I like that. I really like that. And something else that I like about you is you are an ambassador for the Australian, New Zealand Mental Health Association. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, fortunate perhaps. And I like to look at the worst things in my life with gratitude these days. There was a period of time where I was very resentful of the bad things that I was going through, but I'm very grateful now for I wish I didn't have to go through them, but I'm very grateful for the experiences that I've had, because they've afforded me great opportunities. And one of those is to be an ambassador for the Australian New Zealand Mental Health Association. And, primarily that role allows me to speak to a wide range of people about addiction, about mental health. It allows me to speak at conferences and engage with, everyone from academics to professionals to people with lived experience about how they're managing mental health in the world, whether it's addiction, depression, PTSD, all manners of mental health concerns. It's been great that the Australian New Zealand Mental Health Association has been willing to, take me on, I suppose. The great thing about the organisation is they're very pro lived experience. And I've got to say, having gone through some mental health dramas in the past, there's not a lot of people that are automatically willing to, let you represent their organisation. It's a little different now that I'm 8 years beyond and doing some good things. But yeah, it was a great opportunity. It is a great opportunity, and I really value the chance I get to speak to people all over the world about mental health and about solutions that, and for me, they're results-based solutions, not tick and flicks, and looking at things different ways. So they're very, very fortunate to be in that place.
Yeah, it's curious for me because mental health in America is an interesting topic. It's so layered, and in more recent years, it is a much more common, like, something that people talk about a lot more. But like I remember growing up, it was not a conversation that anybody ever had. It was, oh, you're too sensitive. Oh, get over it. Oh, like we did so much worse, or whatever it is. And nowadays, people are a little bit more aware. Things like anxiety, depression, they're not as taboo in America anymore. So I'm curious, what is the stigma of mental health in Australia?
Yeah, look, I think it's following a very similar trend that you see there in the US. That, and again, this is probably more so in it still exists more so in alpha dominated environments or high performance environments where talking about it is still relatively taboo. But there is becoming a lot more acceptance. Look, I work in an industry that or I work from a premise of brutal honesty, and I also have to acknowledge that a lot of people will use mental health as an excuse and as a place to be a victim. And I think, I've said to people a lot that, to me, I've written about this, depression is easy. It's not pleasant. I'm not expecting everybody to want to rush out there and get themselves a batch of depression. I didn't love it. I'm glad I don't have it. But when you do have it, it's easy. I didn't have to do anything because I had depression, right? If I'm not successful, I can say it's because of my depression. It's because of my addiction. It's because of my anxiety. And it gives you a crutch to not take responsibility for yourself. And I've found that the difficulty is, if I work hard on my depression and I'm able to move through that, then if I'm not successful, guess whose fault it is now? It's mine. And I don't want that to be the case. So it's easier for me to have depression. Again, not pleasant. I don't wish it upon anybody. But we do have a lot of people that stop the conversation at, I have depression, I have anxiety. They don't take the next step, which is, okay, so what do I do about it? Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of things, including medication, but aside from medication, that you can do that can help you move from where you are now to where you want to be, even if that's one step. You have agency in taking control of your morning routine, of your mindfulness practice, of your exercise, of the nutrition you eat, of what you watch on your screens, of who you engage with. All of those things are going to impact your mental health. And if you're not controlling all of those, then unfortunately, and again, as upsetting as it might be for people to hear, you have some control over the feelings that you're having if you are not controlling some of those things in your life.
Right. I always I've talked to a lot of people, not only podcasting, but also professionally, personally. I've worked with a lot of people, and for me, I always had this idea about depression. There are two kinds of depression, at least in my world. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not somebody with specialized training, but I always like to think there's two levels of depression. One is completely chemical. It is something that your body does. And for that, medication might be your better option. It's something that your body just produces chemicals a certain way, and you need to counteract it. But I also think that there's a depression in what you do and how you live your life. Like in America, especially, and I'm sure it's similar in Australia, people will work their 9 to 5 jobs and be miserable, just so upset and just so unhappy, but they just do it because they have to do it. And I always find that the people that I talk to on the show are the most interesting ones, are either the ones that completely flip that script just because they can, or the ones that do it because they have to. And you are definitely one of the latter on that one, where you had to change your life in order to become successful or to change what was going on. So I really do appreciate that you bring two different levels of mental health to the table. One is medication could be a thing, but also because you're a big science guy, like neurology and all these things, but you're also like, hey, you got to take some accountability for yourself at the end of the day too.
Yeah, look, and I took medication for a very short time, but the way I talk about medication for people in most cases, and look, I will talk in absolutes a lot of the time, even though I accept that there are cases of chemical only depression or genetic and that sort of thing. But the chances of that being you are so slim that it's not funny, right? And therefore, it's easier for me to talk in absolutes and say that doesn't exist for anybody, because I used to own a gym as well, and if we allowed everybody to believe that it was a thyroid issue for the 1% of people in the world that it happens to be, not the other 99% of people want to believe it's them because it's not their fault. So it's easier to say you control all of this. But when you talk about medication, for a lot of people, medication is necessary. But in my view, medication also provides you the space to do your own work. Mm-hmm. There is no circumstance where we're looking after your nutrition, looking after your exercise, looking after your relationships, looking after your mindfulness. There is no circumstance where doing that is harmful, right? Okay. It can only improve your circumstances. Whether or not you have a chemical issue with depression or not, whether you require medication or not, there are no circumstances where taking some control for your mental health is not beneficial.
See, I like
that. Therefore, the question is, why don't you do that? right? Irrespective of whether you take medication, whether it's chemical, whether it's somebody else's fault, you will be in a better place for taking some level of control. You might not be in a perfect place, but you will certainly be in a better place. And I think that medication in a lot of occasions is super beneficial to provide the space, the mental capacity to be able to work on yourself so that hopefully at some stage in the future, you don't require the medication.
Right.
Whereas I do think there's a lot of people that the desire is, if I take the medication for the rest of my life, then I don't have to do anything.
Yeah. Also, I think a lot of people think, I'm going to take this medication, I'm fine. Like everything's fixed.
Yeah.
Like the magic pill has existed forever. It used to be snake oil salesmen who would come to town with magic elixirs. Now people want the instant fix. They want, like, I was guilty of doing fat burners for a long time. Like the pills that helps you lose weight and get you shredded. And then it turned out just eat right and go to the gym. Like it's not rocket science, but people look.
There is a magic pill, but the magic pill is eating right, is the exercise, is the sleep, is the hydration, is the good relationships, is the mindfulness, is the purpose-driven activities. That's the magic pill. It's just that it doesn't come in a packet.
I love it. See, that's why I knew you and I were going to get along. Now, we are getting towards the end of our show. We do have one of my favorite segments. It is our rapid fire question segment. So every episode, I pick like 4 or 5 questions, nothing too crazy. I try and cater them to whoever I'm talking to. And it is literally just off the top of your head answer if you're down to play.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So the first one, a book that has impacted you and your journey.
Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, deep cut. Wow, I like that. One key trait that every high performer should cultivate.
Understanding their own purpose.
Okay, I like it. Advice you'd give to someone that's struggling in silence.
Speak up. Be honest. Do the tough thing.
Do the tough thing. See, that should be a t-shirt. I like that. All right, and this one is a personal one just for me. Your biggest learning from the law enforcement world.
Biggest learning from the law enforcement world, probably that discipline gets the job done.
I like that. I like that a lot. And that is coming towards the end of our episode. So, Gary, if people wanted to get in touch with you or find some of your content, where would be the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, either through my own name, so Gary Fay, it's Fahey. If you Google that, I should come up, garyfay.com. Or my Instagram is strong.mend, MEND, as in strong fix. But
I like
strong mend, if you look that up, you'll find me as well.
Perfect. Gary, thank you so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun. We had a blast.
Appreciate it, Paul. Thank you, mate, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, my friend. You as well.